Welcome to a special edition of the Eclectic Collection. This is going to be episode 9, and I'm simply going to call it Pebble. I'll explain that in a little bit. So in 2009, December 10th of 2009, I was running around like usual, and I was at school late doing a yearbook deadline and trying to get some papers graded and busy with my own crazy life, and the holidays were quickly approaching. So I had to pick some things up, and that night we were getting advent calendars delivered, rather late I might add, since they should have been there by December 1st for the World Language Club that I ran at the time. And the delivery was so late that I made an agreement with the UPS guy to just meet me in a random parking lot that was halfway between his route and my home. So I was very late getting to my house that night. And it was a normal random Thursday that was boring. It just had the twist of picking up these silly advent calendars, which we used to sell for, the club for the kids to purchase in the school. No big deal. And that night I got in, and I was beat. It was like probably 10 o'clock, maybe about quarter of before I walked in. And I remember thinking, well, I got Christmas stuff to do. I didn't finish grading my papers. I was caught up in my own world. And as I walked in, on the left of the side door where I always enter, I heard my brother snoring, as was the case because he was wickedly narcoleptic. And he hadn't been feeling great the last couple days, but I didn't want to wake him. And as I walked into the kitchen, I could see and hear the TV on, and my mom was watching, some show. And I remember thinking, you know what, I'm just going to go to bed. I'm beat, and I got to go get clean and worry about everything tomorrow. So I had gone into the back of the house to get cleaned up, and I probably had 3 or 4 text messages to answer, and I would say within 7 minutes I was about to step into the shower. And the second I stepped in and got just wet enough to be annoying, I heard this terrible noise, like this loud thud. And about 5 seconds later, my mother came screaming toward me, and I could hear her, you gotta come now. Hurry up. Rocky fell. So my brother, Rock, he's a big dude, and I thought, oh my God, he fainted? Like he was asleep. So I raced out of there and throw on clothes real fast, and I run down to the other side of the house, and he's on the floor. And when I went to approach him, unfortunately, he was cold, and his eyes were open, and this weird little reality hit me. And, they say when you're in a difficult situation, you suddenly have adrenaline. And he was sitting in a recliner. We had a Lazy Boy brown recliner that was in his room. And I literally picked that up and threw it over my shoulder. And I flipped him over, and I could tell that he had passed away. Not something I expected that night. He wasn't ill. To this day, we really don't know what it was. Could have been an embolism, could have been a heart attack. He actually looked a little blue, and they said something fancy like petechial hemorrhaging, whatever that means. All I knew is I immediately had no brother. I tried CPR. It didn't work. He was gone. Don't know how and when that happened. He was snoring just 20-25 minutes prior to this happening, but that was it. And the chaos began. And he was a volunteer firefighter for years, I think from when he was 16. So in about 3 nanoseconds of calling 911, every single fireman, police person, uh, first responder you could think of, paramedic, was there. Every single person. And I think that I was so in the moment trying to make sense of what happened and tell them what we knew. They busted through the door in seconds to try and help him, and he was gone. But um, it was just a chaotic cacophony of lights outside and sirens and crazy. And I obviously was in my house and never walked out to see how crazy the street was and what the neighbors must have thought or whatever was going on in the adjacent streets. But it was not a good day and not an expectation we had. And eventually my whole family came from everywhere to show up, and a priest came for last rites, and all the typical things that go on. I remember the flatline paper being handed to my mother, who was still in disbelief, to kind of prove that he wasn't around anymore. And my sisters didn't really believe me. I had to call them, and they weren't quick to catch on. I don't know, I wouldn't joke about that, but for some reason they didn't really believe that he was gone. Like, what do you mean? We were just talking to him. And after all that, in the midst of this, I started to kind of mentally drift and think about what that meant. He was never going to see 2010. Decade change. He was only 52. So, that was a short lifespan. He wasn't going to see, the second half, if you will, of his life. Like, all these little things just started popping up. And when someone passes, you go into this mode where suddenly you have a million things to do. And everybody on earth that you know and cares about you is at your house and bringing you food and trying to keep you focused on things. And you're busy writing obituaries and coming up with pictures and collages and writing eulogies and getting services together and talking to undertakers. I mean, all of a sudden it's just a hostile takeover. And you have no time. You need to be respectful and creative, and you're in a terrible place of time crunch. And it's not the kind of thing you want to have a time crunch about. So it occurred to me the other day when I was looking at the calendar that this year, it happens that the 10th falls on a Thursday. And it's been 11 years. And it's obviously, I think about them all the time, but, it wasn't exactly a good Christmas time thing to happen in our family. And I can remember my father wanting to pull the Christmas lights so that we didn't have anything externally fun or festive. We didn't get a tree that year. It was just weird. It was just a horrible, terrible time. And we all really liked the holidays. My sister was born on Christmas, so there's a lot of extra meaning in my family to that. And it was just a terrible year. And in all the icky, one thing kind of clung to me in my memory, and it was what I focused on, and it has kind of plagued me since. The couple days before, I guess, I don't know, it might have been Tuesday or Wednesday, I was always coming and going somewhere, and he loved Dunkin' Donuts coffee. And I was on my way out, probably 5 or 6 o'clock. I didn't know when I was going to be back. I figured it would be late. And he said, well, if you're going to be back soon, can you bring me a Dunkin' Donuts coffee? And I said, oh, Rock, I would. I really don't think I'm going to be back in time. You'll probably be asleep. I don't, basically I'll put it off to the weekend kind of a thing. And, but yeah, next time I go out on the weekend when I'm gigging or I got stuff to do, I'll bring you one home on the weekend. But I don't think I am going to be back in a timely manner. And he's, oh, it's all right, forget about it. And he didn't think anything of it. But that cup of coffee has probably plagued me since then, because all I could think was, you're such a loser. You didn't even go get him a cup of coffee. And here's this guy that did everything for you all the time. Because let's face it, I'm the oops baby of the clan. I'm the youngest of 4. And he was the oldest. And I have to say, I only know my social security number because of my brother. He always had me filling out some form, or he always had me reciting information. What's your address? What's your phone number? What's your name? Where do you live? Partially because he was a firefighter, and that's what they did was like lost little kids prevention and fire prevention and Smokey the Bear ads, and partially because his logical mind believed that I would be the last one standing because I was the youngest and it made sense. Who knows the way I'm going? I have no idea, but um, that was kind of why he always did that. And it is just crazy because he's done so much and touched people really lives in a way that you would not think, and I didn't know it as well as I knew him, as close as we were. I mean, we lived together. Um, and like that was always the joke, was that was the plan. Mom and dad would get old. I was the oops baby, so I had older parents. We joke in my family that there's that set of parents and then my parents, but we would take care of them together and handle the house and everything. And that plan went out the window that day, and I was prepped for that plan from birth, so that really threw me. And that cup of coffee really bothered me. And in placing all of the information to get together for the funeral and the honor guard and everybody from the fire station that was going to be helpful in the next couple of days to my world, you find yourself in a position of disconnection because you're going through the motions. And I met all these people. Some I knew, but I met a lot of people that I didn't, that he knew, that knew him in a way that was just unfathomable to me. A man walked up that I hadn't seen in years and handed my mother an envelope with money in it and said, I owed this to Rocco. That guy could have easily skipped town and not given that money back. First of all, we didn't even know he loaned him any money. Didn't ask why, don't know, don't care. But that was crazy to me, and oh no, he really helped me out in a bad time. Just that was unfathomable. People from, Dunkin' Donuts and the Wawa nearby, where he just went to get his coffee on a daily basis, because at that point he was working nights, and he was working like a swing shift, and they came and said, oh, we're going to miss him. All the people that he used to work with, people in the firehouse, en masse, there's tons and tons of people from there. And just fire science that he had taught for years, and the guys from the fire courses, and the people that he had worked with, years ago in the arcade industry. And he was constantly some sort of salesman. So many different people that had been in his life, and they each brought a different story to the table of something that he did or helped them with, or a product that he got them, or whatever that nobody else could, or not the way specifically designed unless he did it. And it wasn't new news that he would go the extra step. It was just new that we didn't know he had done some of these things and knew some of these people. And it was really eye-opening. And the hardest part, I think, of all of the funeral parts that went on was when we had the mass, and afterwards, rather than a hearse, he had designed a lot of the stake bodies and big snorkel trucks and firefighter paraphernalia and trucks and things that they use, and they brought one of the utility trucks to carry his coffin on, and they went the route by way of the Station 51 that he was a part of for so many years, which I had heard they had done and was a thing that the honor guard had. They stood by him the whole time throughout the viewing and the church, which I thought was fantastic, and they were a really, really nice group of people. And they loaded his coffin onto there, and they gave us a flag, which was very tear-jerking to begin with. But they drove by Station 51, and as they stopped the car, they had a little uniform pile in front, folded up, that was his gear. And there was one of the current guys in full dress uniform. They stopped and saluted, and they sounded the fire whistle for Station 51. And that thing is loud when you're right next to it. And it was one of the coolest and yet heart wrenching moments I think I've ever experienced in my life, because the whole theory was that, he would, that was his last call. And that's what they call it, was your last call. And obviously, he wouldn't be responding. And, it was this call home, if you will. So that was difficult at best. And it was, like I said, cool but heart wrenching. And that was stuck with me for a while. And then you have to get through all this family and friend stuff. And then all of a sudden, everybody goes away and you're left with, okay, process this any way you know how. Good luck. Because what I've noticed with deaths is that the rest of the world sort of moves on. And no one cares. Not to say that they don't. I mean, I had fantastic support. So did my family. But, life does move forward. And everyone, did their bit and helped out. But then they had to go back to their lives. And even if you're not quite adjusted in yours yet, now you live with this loss. And I've seen it time and again. And there is no way to prep a person for that. And I've also learned that no two people grieve the same way. What is normal to you may be completely foreign and bizarre to someone else. And yet, something simple can also serve as a trigger. It could be a song, it could be a smell, it could be a favorite candy, a silly phrase, a moment, a picture. It could be anything. And you don't know, what's going to set you off. And I am always partial to laughter than crying in life. It's just how I am. I definitely can't take myself too seriously. And, life is too short, which I learned that I've said that my whole life, but I learned that the hard way, that way. And, that is something that has processed with me since December 10th of 2009. And, my brother was a really fantastic guy with a lot of facets to him. And I think that's why I admired him so much, because there wasn't one thing. You couldn't say he just did this. A lot of people are defined by their careers, or they're defined by their children, or they're defined by, one accomplishment that they had. And that's great. Everybody has something that they're good at, or that they're known for. But, he was a single guy, and he was a pretty simple dude. He was brilliant. A funny thing, because he didn't really care for school too much. But as long as I was alive, from my perspective, being 18 years, younger than he was always a fireman. He was always a salesman. There were these things that he always did. And way back in the day, he was even a pilot. He took flying lessons. And he really wanted to be a pilot. And I was very young at the time. But story goes that he wanted to sign up for the Air Force because he wanted to fly. And the guy came to the house and he talked to mucho recruiters, from what my family tells me. I was little. I was like 2. And they wanted to sign him up. And he passed the intelligence test flying colors. And then the big moment came and they found out he was colorblind, which I always knew because I was the person that used to have to go match his socks and write what color they were. So he knew, because he was badly colorblind. And apparently that's a no-no, because the instrumentation is all different colors and lights. And he asked the guy point blank, "Will I fly?" And the recruiter was like, "Nah, probably not." And he's like, "Okay, thanks for your time. See ya." And he never went that route. So he did have a private pilot's license for fun, but by no means was he ever, I'll say, a professional that went to the lengths of flying for a private, carrier or military wise. And I think that really bummed him out, because now there's corrective surgeries and things that are not as difficult about it, from what my buddy Will in the Air Force tells me. But at the time, you're talking late 70s, that was constriction. And I think that molded him into other directions. I really think that's what he wanted to do. I knew there was some reason that he read the book Firefox and watched it with Clint Eastwood so many times, but so that was kind of a bummer. And as that started, I think that's where he was already a fireman, and he served so many ways. He was a trainer. He was the fire science instructor. He was a captain. He would go on to be the treasurer. And when he passed, he was the treasurer for years at Station 51. So I can remember crawling through, being in like the little onesie zip up pajamas, which I don't know why they don't make for adults, but it's such a bummer. But he used to take me, at all hours of the night to the firehouse, and I would crawl through the trucks and find all the little smelly compartments with different things in it, and the jaws of life, and all these greasy oil terrible things, and that was just a normal night, was to go down to the firehouse. And he had a thing for crossword puzzles. He loved crossword puzzles. I hate crossword puzzles, just to be clear. My mother loves crossword puzzles, and that was their thing. My mom and my brother were very close, and they had this relationship based on meatballs and crossword puzzles. Every Sunday morning, that was like their thing, and they would sit and make meatballs and do the crossword puzzle. Of course, my brother would generally end up falling asleep at the table because, as I said, he was narcoleptic, but that came on later in life. You'd be talking to him and he'd just fall asleep. Imagine being the person that had to drive to the shore with him and ensure that he stayed awake. Yeah, looking back, probably not the safest move, but that was definitely something that happened. And the colorblind factor was hilarious because one time I remember him trying to go. It wasn't really a job interview, but he was being recruited, if you will, from one Ford dealership to another because he worked for Ford, and we're all a Ford family, and I've millions of Fords between all of them. All right, maybe not millions, but lots of Fords. We've had lots of Fords, and all the dad's truck fleet was Fords, and we always drive Fords. I have a Mustang, and I'm, always liked my Expedition, and mom's got a little Pocus Focus and whatnot. So we've always had Fords. I can remember him bringing home the Bronco back in the day when he started working for the first dealership, and he was negotiating like a better commission or something, and he was trying to put a tie on and look professional, and everything was mismatched. He had like white socks with like a yellow stripe on it, and a pair of brown pants, and a red tie, and the shirt was like blue. I was like, just stop, take everything off and start again. And I like had laid out his clothes for him because he couldn't see much for much. Like black was black, white was white, and I think brown was brown, and maybe yellow on a good day, but it had to be like Tweety bird canary yellow. And that was it. There was no, I think red showed up black or blue, and blues and greens, forget it. And there's a lot of stuff that was gray. Like he just really was colorblind. And it wouldn't be until a student many years later that was equally colorblind that I wouldn't come upon such colorblindness again. But we'll talk about that guy later. He taught me to play cards. He taught me to play cards at a very early age, beyond like War and Crazy Eights. I think like every rummy there was, rummy and rummy 500 and knock rummy, and never did get down gin rummy, but they would play cards to all hours of the night, and he was just always, he was like a big kid, and I'm pretty much that way. So if there was fun to be had or mischief to get into, he was gonna find it, and he was gonna do that. He was not afraid to take chances. And I'm very jealous because the one thing that he would do without any reservations whatsoever is walk away from a bad situation. I think that comes from salesmanship because, they tell you if the person makes you uncomfortable and it's a gut reaction of money and it's bad, walk away from the table. He could do that. And he would tell you to do that. He would always come with us to negotiate cars. Car salesman, just for whatever reason, it's always a process to buy a car. But of course he was one, so he knew it. So he would just call up a friend and say, look, I want this is what we're paying you, and deal with it. And that's kind of how I've become with that. But at the time, it was unheard of. And you just had to be able to leave. And it was such a blanket statement for him. We just walk away. It's just that simple. Just walk away. And people were like, oh, but, I'm going to be rude. I'm going to be impolite. He says, no, just walk away. And he did. And I think that it was a really admirable trait because, how many times do you stick in a situation that's awful? And you shouldn't. Even if it is just watching a terrible movie or finishing a bad book, which I am very guilty of. I do that all the time. Hopefully not leaving a podcast early. Hopefully not that. But I had to say that. But I think there's so many times that you're in a bad situation or a bad relationship or a bad job or a bad position you've been put in, and people stay in it, and you shouldn't, and you shouldn't have guilt about it. and he didn't. He would literally tell people to go pound sand and walk out the door. And I thought that was great. A couple bosses gave him a hard time at different times. He was producing crazy, fantastic numbers. And if he gave 120%, they'd want 125. And he'd be very upfront and say, okay, well, you're going to either compensate me for that or see you bye-bye. And, sometimes people did and they met his terms and sometimes they didn't and he would walk away. But unscathed, no problem. And he was very courageous that way. I am a wuss when it comes to that. And most people are, I think. But he was very courageous that way. And that was definitely a rock life lesson. Walk away if it's bad and just leave the table. And it plays into with the Ford thing and being a salesman. There's so many things, stuff, items around that are evidence of him from being the best salesman. I used to joke that he could sell igloos to Eskimos. He got the number one salesman almost every month, and they would give you either a bonus or a thing, and usually it was some appliance or item. And I remember, and I loved, the first one that I really saw him get was gigantic. It was a projector TV, and we're talking like late 70s, early 80s. And that was unheard of. Now people still have them, but they were huge back then. It was basically a huge coffee table with 3 large lenses that projected at an actual screen that stood on feet. And it was the coolest television, and it was bigger than anything that you can even buy now. I know my perspective is thwarted because I was a little kid, but truly, like, I've seen 60 and 70-inch televisions now. This thing was bigger than that. I want to say it was like 120 some inches across, and I probably 5 feet tall. It was huge. It barely fit in my basement. And I love that TV. Everybody was wanting to watch the game on that TV, watch the Super Bowl on that TV. And that was a gift. He got that from, most sales. The other funny thing was the 1978 Litton 2 generation microwave. That was one of the first microwaves ever. I call it the cancer wave because it's probably not shielded and totally unhealthy. But yes, that thing still runs. And when I make popcorn and heat my lunch in my classroom, that's the thing doing it. And that was another good month for him. I remember them giving him all sorts of things from the Ford dealerships. And before he worked for Ford, when he was younger, his first big salesman job was at Sam Goody. And unfortunately, I don't think Sam Goody even really exists much anymore. But we used to have one in the Springfield Mall. And he worked on the audio deck. Back when audio decks were a thing. Now, pretty much you got George's Music, and that's about it. Where else are you going to go buy DJ stuff? I guess like Guitar Center. But, in the day, hi-fi was a thing. And they had a lot of the first tech. And he loved tech, and he loved gadgets. So it was a perfect fit for him. And he was a fantastic salesman because he liked that stuff. So he learned about it and read up on it and try all the products out. And that's where a lot of the people that I would say, started to shape his friend core were. And he came home one day with a gigantic machine that weighed about 80 pounds. And I said, "What's this?" And he said, "They call it a VCR. There's this thing in Germany right now called Beta. I don't know if it's going to catch on here." It did not. But that's like the Zune catching on to the Apple iPod. Never happened. But it's a VCR. And you put in VHS tapes. And I said, "What does VCR stand for?" He said, "Video Cassette Recorder." And he was a big dude. And he had a hard time putting that thing up on the counter. It was heavy. And it was all like wood finish panel. Looked like ugly station wagon wood siding. And metal. And it was very mechanical. It only had like fast forward, rewind, and play. I think that was about it. And we probably had one of the first ones. And it was wild to be able to record a show and zip through the commercials. Granted, you still had to stand up and do that. There was no remote. Oh, but rock would come through. Just a few years later, they had a sleek looking remote with a very long cord that you could plug into that VCR because that was the deluxe model. And he had won that from selling an amount of speakers, or the top selling speaker numbers on the audio deck. And I still love that thing. Now, of course, that has since died because the mechanics just passed away. But that was a a big one. And I remember the other big thrill was getting a very illegal copy of Star Wars, A New Hope. When that first came out, and I guess the first time it came out on VHS, things used to be about 99 or $100, and you had to wait forever to get a tape, if you could even get a tape, and it usually was a year to 2 year wait. And you figure that came out in 77 in the theaters, and I want to say it was like 80. It was right before or right after Empire. And he came home and he said, "Here you go, kid." He was always bringing me something. "Here, kid. I got something for you, kid. Here, kid." And he brought me that home, and I thought, "Oh my God, this is so cool." I watched it over and over. I probably watched Star Wars every night. And I couldn't tell anybody about it because we weren't supposed to have it. But at this point, I don't think the copyright police are going to be able to come after him. And I will deny having that tape, although I'm pretty sure I still do somewhere. And people don't care about VHS anymore. Yes, by the way, Beta never caught on. He was a fantastic chef, just a really good cook. Probably one of the best non-Greek baklava making people in the world. He would take risks. He was a risk taker. He would just do things that he would try it. If it didn't work, oh well, because I think he was more interested in challenging himself, and if it worked, great, and if it didn't, try the next time or try something else. But he just had a phenomenal repertoire of everything: breakfast, lunch, dinner, pastries, you name it. He was quite the cook, and that was upsetting that there's things that I still think about him taking, making pizzelles with mom and rolling them up real fast and making cannolis out of them, and just little things that were unheard of. Just trying stuff out, and it was always good whenever he did. Whatever he produced in the kitchen, he would make a mess, and then it was our problem to deal with the mess, but he would cook well. And I think that one of those really helpful moments that sticks out, we were driving back from our house in Brigantine at the shore, and it was the afternoon on a Sunday. It was summertime, really hot, and he used to get cars a lot that they would give him a dealer car, and he would come home with, every so many weeks or months, they'd give him whatever the dealer car in the lot was. And this time it was a Ford Crown Victoria, and it's a pretty big car. And we crossed over the bridge, and just as we crossed over the bridge, he saw an ambulance pulled over, and there was a woman that was clearly in pain on a stretcher, and there must have been shorthanded, or the ambulance was having an issue, or a flat tire, something wasn't right. And he stopped. We were in Philadelphia, and he was, we're in the suburbs of Philly where we live, but we were in the middle of Philadelphia. He was not part of that first responders unit or anything. And he pulled over. He said, "Let me see what's going on here." And he pulled over, and he told him he was a fireman, and, "Do you need help?" And turned out that the ambulance tire had flattened, the lights were on, and the woman was in labor about to give birth. And I guess it came down to he could either change the tire or help with the labor. He opted to change the tire. And luckily, they were able to get the woman to the hospital, which wasn't that far away, immediately thereafter. But I'll never forget him stopping. And I was thinking, you're a stranger. They don't know you. Of course, in the 80s, it was a lot more fun times to pull over and help people than it is now. Now everybody's guarded and jaded and afraid that everybody's going to kill one another. But at the time, that was more acceptable. But I remember thinking, oh, you're not part of their squad. You might not be as welcomed as you think, but they were really good with it. And he did help them out. I would say that the big thing that I loved was the arcade business that he started. He went into business, among many other things, with one of his buddies, and they opened about 3 arcades. I just remember one was in Delaware because it wasn't too far, and he used to take me to that one all the time. And I grew up in a very privileged lifestyle, not just because my family was fantastic and my mom and dad were crazy hard workers and we had everything we ever wanted and needed, but because I had such perks courtesy of my brother. Really courtesy of all of my family, but my brother takes the cake. I fell in love with a little yellow munchy guy named Pac-Man somewhere around 1980. Thank you, Bally Midway Corporation. And I had just the best brother in the world. He saw things um, for what they were and worth and potential. And that is a gift that not everybody has. Most people look for the hole in the donut. He would look for how to make more donuts. Pardon the 1980s time to make the donuts pun. But he just could see growth in things and what was going to be the next thing. And he was with me at an arcade. We were in Florida. We went to Disney. And Pong, which had come out in the 70s, was about all that was in this little arcade that was in, it was like a hole in the wall at the Howard Johnson's at the time. And we would get back and we were beat from the parks. And of course, back then, it was pretty much just Walt Disney World in Florida. And then eventually Epcot opened in 81. And although we did go back in 81, this was before Epcot was even a thing. So there was no Hollywood Studios, which was, I think started out MGM. There was no extra thing. It was River Country, and it was that was like the water park, which has since gone bye-bye. It still stands, but it's like rotting away somewhere. And Magic Kingdom, and that was before any extra pieces, but still awesome. Happiest place on earth. And I love Mickey World, so we would go there. And I was little, and we went, and we would go back at like Sundays at night. And it was like ice cream Sundays at like 10, 11 o'clock at night at Howard Johnson's. And after we eat the Sunday, there was a little arcade, and they had about 3 games in it. It was like Pong and some driving thing that didn't really amount to much. It was way before pole position, and like a pinball machine. And there wasn't much room in this place. And I would play every night. He would get me some quarters, and I would play. And I remember thinking, this is cool. These are cool. I was like 5. And I just took to it, and I liked it. And when he started looking into putting some machines into the firehouse, so he looked at some pinball machines, and he made some contacts, and he was able to buy 1 or 2 of them, and he put them in the firehouse, and he kind of tested it out on the people in the firehouse. And shortly thereafter, because he bought 1 or 2 machines, he got invited to start purchasing vending type machines. Not like now, back then, different game, very mechanical, certainly nothing that took a credit card or had anything electronic in it. It was pretty quarter based, turn the dial like you would get a newspaper on the street. And at the time, cigarette machines, which were perfectly legal, not that I've ever smoked or condoned cigarettes, but they were lucrative and they were a lot cheaper back then. So he got a few cigarette machines and vending machines and snack machines, and he put them in the firehouse in different places that he knew. And they went well. And then because he bought more stuff, he got invited to more things and more places and better deals. And then eventually he got invited to a show. And one of the shows was Bally Midway Corporation, what would become Nintendo, Konami. Atari wasn't quite a thing yet, but they were working on it. Basically all the big companies that were, at the time, gaming and tech companies, before gaming and tech companies even knew they were gaming and tech companies. And he went and saw what would be Pac-Man, the first model Pac-Man. And there were a few games, but that was the one that stuck out. And later would be Donkey Kong and Frogger. And he went to several shows, and from that point on, he went to almost all of them. But he ordered, I think he ordered 2 machines. And they were pretty expensive at the time, but he knew how to deal with the circuitry and the electronics, and he still has, actually sitting next to me, is this gigantic case full of all the little electronics and the tools to use to be able to repair that stuff. And he had a knack for it, and he tried it, he played it, they saw a demonstration. People were really skeptical, and he said, well, it looks cool, I'm going to take one. And a lot of people were, yeah, okay, I might get one. But there was some deal that if you did more, you bought more than one, you got more money off or whatever. And people really gave him a hard time. So I don't know, Rocky, you might not be right. You might, what if it's wrong? What if it doesn't make any sense? And he's like, look, Pong was huge, and it didn't even have the graphics and stuff that this thing does. I'm telling you, it's going to take off. So he met more people there that were like minded, and they kind of made a deal to pull together. Well, look, if you want one and you want one and I want one, and you guys are willing to buy two and I'm willing to buy two, let's all go together and see if they'll make us a deal for like an equal amount for all of us, but it'll look like we're all a company. And they did, and Rock orchestrated that, and they went for it, and he was able to get three machines for himself and the other guys, and they fronted a portion of the cost. It paid off immensely, and with those machines, after that, they said these little cocktail table models, and then he did the same with Frogger, and he did the same with Donkey Kong. Well, at that point, they were taking off, and he had enough machines between that and the pinball machines and the vending machines to make a little arcade. So he started talking to different people, and eventually he would get a couple of arcades together. And of course, I would go and I would play, and that was fantastic. And he would, open the door and give me X amount of credits. And if people came in to pay, obviously I would walk away and they would do their thing, but I would just go and play all the time in the off hours. And having grown up in arcades and places like Aladdin's Castle, which is so sad that that's gone, and good old Putt Putt, that was like what I did. Later, I didn't know how lucky I would get when my parents became very involved at the casino, and Harrah's, when I was 8 years old, opened up and had a very large game room, which I would come to dominate for years. And around that time, he kept getting invited to bigger shows, and more people would approach him. And he brought me. I was excited. And it was this whole day. It was this big thing on a weekend in the summer, and it was like a 2-day deal, and you could go and see all the games and the demonstrations and hear about it. And of course, there were seminars for people to learn how to fix them and wire them. And he did that. He would go and do all that. Most of these people were just owners that wanted to buy it and never deal with it again. But he took the time to learn how to do all that and sat in those classes. And he was quick, man. He just picked it up and he could understand it. And he was teaching people how to do that and explain the electronics and the circuitry by the time he left. And in those 2 days, we drove back and forth twice. It was a little bit far into Delaware, but not that bad. I was playing every game I could get my hands on. And he took a lot of heat for me being there. A lot of guys, this is pretty male dominated, like early 80s, and here I am. And people were like, oh, Rock, who's that? And he said, it's my little sister. And they laughed at him, and, a couple people had choice words. And I remember feeling very offended because I was thinking, hello, who do you think's playing the games? Duh. But, I didn't say anything. It was his gig. And he's like, laugh all you want. Watch this. Now I was being put on the spot and I didn't know it. He's like, what do you think of this game? I was like, it was awesome. He's like, what about that? What about this? And he took me around and they followed. And they're like, oh, you're going to believe what an 8-year-old thinks? And he's like, yeah, because that's who's playing the games. And that's the demographic that I'm shooting for. I want kids to come to the arcades, not you guys. Bunch of 30-year-old smoking, drinking goofs. No, I want kids to come to the arcades so that kids can put their quarters in the arcades and I can keep the arcade open. And they're going to want this, this, and this and explain what was good about it. Well, I really, unbeknownst to me, not just fell in love with gaming and the whole process, but I really, because I played so much, I got good. It was just straight practice. So I knew a lot of the patterns of Pac-Man, and I could naturally, get little Frogger across the road many times. And once other more sophisticated games started coming around, I was good at them too, and yeah, I could play pinball and it was fun because it was pinball, but pinball's generic. It's just about the glass on the front and the style of the pinball machine, but all pinball machines are the same. So to me, this was fantastic that there was a little laser button and a joystick and a fire button or whatever you had to do. And as simple as the graphics were and as simple as everything was at the time, it was still new and cool. Now it's a different world, but we wouldn't have what we have in gaming now if it wasn't for those first pioneers. So he took me to the new line of games and asked me to play them. And they kept laughing at him and giving him a hard time. And I did. I spent most of the rest of the day playing what would become Venture and Tempest and Centipede and Asteroids, Space Invaders, and Dig Dug. And boy, was I good at Dig Dug. And at the very end, there was Galaga. And I loved it. And it was just a click. And I'm just good. I don't know what to tell you. Look out. And I liked it. And I was playing from when I was a little kid. And everyone was fantastic. I loved them all. But the little crowd formed. People started to watch. And all of a sudden, these naysaying skeptics that were giving him a hard time were asking me questions. Like, what did you like about it? Or how did you know that pattern? Or how did you know to do that? And I was kind of learning as I went, because the machines were set up not to put money in them, but you could just keep, starting over. Well, back then, if you had 3 lives and you died, you had to start over. There's no reset button. So I kind of looked at him like, are we telling him that? He's like, don't tell him nothing. So we didn't. I only kept to his friends and the people that were backing him. And then all of a sudden, they wanted to be his best friend, take him out to dinner, take him out to lunch. Oh, bring your little sister, blah, blah, blah. Let's talk about this and that. What do you think? How many should I order? So then he's like, just play him. Play him as best you can. Play him as much as you can. And don't tell him anything. Don't tell him if you like it. Don't tell him if you don't. Be expressionless. So I did. And I kept doing that. And his friends, and he did really great. And I can remember a lot of those guys investing in what I thought probably weren't going to be the best choices. And most of those went by the wayside, because if you weren't a serious arcade goer and a serious gamer, you weren't going to like it. Eventually, a lot of that stuff gave way to things like Pole Position, Millipede, Crystal Castles, Rolling Thunder, Crazy Climber, Stop Thief. They were all great. But they would keep going in the gaming industry. And I just followed it as long as it was there. And the 80s were a time for that. And he was really finger on the pulse of the times with that, and did fantastic with it. And it's probably one of the things that shaped my life. I do not have the talent he did for putting the circuitry together, but in cleaning out the garage some couple years ago, I found this old box, and it was the entire joystick alignment and board for Venture. And it's from back in the 80s. He had ordered it, and I guess it was just pieces for when he had the arcade. It must have been a spare. And I laughed at the manual and everything. And he would take the time to do that, and a lot of people didn't. So I think that's why he had the success that he did. I wish I knew how to fix them, because I'd have every one of them lined up in the basement now. The arcade time, though, was probably one of the best ventures that he ever got involved with. And I'd like to point out that all these different spinning plates in the air that he had were all going on simultaneously. And that is definitely a trait that I absorbed from him. Because if you asked him chocolate or vanilla, he would say yes. I don't ever remember him saying no. It was always, we could do that as well. And I'm very much that way. And I definitely think I owe that trait to him. If you can't stay with it until you figure it out, then you shouldn't have got involved in the first place. He was always gonna stay and figure something out until there was a solution. And that was he was a non-quitter, and yet at the same time had the savvy to leave a bad situation that you shouldn't be in. And that's a really fine line, to be able to do both of those things. And he was just a little kid in the candy store. He was a treat kind of a guy. He always brought me something, stationery, a pen. And I do share being a pen aficionado, which I think, that's fine. I'm a nerd. I'm a geek. Call me whatever you want. Just a Mont Blanc was the creme de la creme of pens. What other second grader has a cross pen and pencil set? Okay, really? Come on. And that meant something to me. I can remember getting a Parker set first, because that was like my trial set until I could get my cross pen and pencil. And then when I went into high school, he bought me a Waterman, which I still have. I definitely had a lot of pens, and the creme de la creme was the Mont Blanc. Um, I had fountain pens, any kind of decent writing implement. And it's funny because as I went on to write the books in the last few years, I had an array of decent pens to go sign them with, which was cool because I didn't want to whip out some plastic crappy pen and be using that to sign books. But it was nice to have a decent writing implement, and I do have an affection for them, and I think that's a thing. I don't know, maybe it's a teacher thing. We like stationery, but he did get me my own stationery, and um, it was monogrammed, and he would always have something for me. He always had something up his sleeve, and we used to literally fight over the Sharper Image and Levenger books that would come to the house, because he said, say to me, "Did you take my Daytimers? Did you take my Sharper Image? Did you take my Brookstone? Did you take my Levenger books?" No. Yeah, I did. All the time. I was like, well, maybe, little elf walked away with it. He's like, well, the little elf better bring it back, because I did like looking at those things, and they always had really cool stuff. And when I went to college, he bought me a crystal Italian Murano glass stylus and liquid ink, and it was really cool. I still use it, because when I went to college, there was no internet, and you either talked to the phone and had a really high phone bill, or you wrote letters, and the stamps were not 50 cents. I'm just throwing that out there, but that was a thing that I still have, and I love that thing. It was really cool. True craftsmanship. He was just notorious for saying, "Hey, come here, I got something for you," and there was always some little gift or present or candy or pen or stationery or something that I would think was cool. And I remember thinking that every time he did that, which was often, I crossed his mind throughout the day, or he thought enough to randomly go get me something. And, I try to do that. I try to think of people that I care about, and if I come upon something, I'm like, oh, they would like that, or, whatever it is. Um, and he was that way. He was very much a giver, and he was very much that way. And it's funny too, because of the things that I did absorb from him, which were very cool. I did not absorb, unfortunately, his musical talent. Yeah, I have none, so I became a DJ. Uh, it's funny, really. My whole family has this musical prowess that I just did not get. Um, I don't know what happened. I guess because I was gonna do like piano lessons because my sister told me it'd be a good idea to start there, and then like the little old lady in the Catholic school basically passed away, and there was nobody to do the piano lesson anymore, and then that kind of like went by the wayside, and I didn't really want to do that. I really always wanted to either learn the sax or learn the drums. That was where my passion was. But no, because they all did other things, Mom was like, oh, can't you play something that they all played? We have so many instruments. Thanks, Mom. Way to foster that. So as a result, I played nothing and have no talent and became a DJ until I went bananas and turned 45 and decided to buy a drum kit, which is also now sitting next to me in the basement, which I proudly say it must have started back in preschool when they handed me a triangle and said, here, kid, keep some time. So I'm hoping that in addition to my watch, I'll be able to keep some time without the use of a metronome and countless hours of Drumeo videos and a lot of help from Anthony. But I'm working on that. Anyhow, not there yet. Not there yet. Probably not Neil Peart anytime soon. But my brother, he was a different story. He could he was played the trumpet, and he was a phenomenal musician. He played all through school and went on to play with a professional band afterwards, and he really loved it, and he really had an appreciation for music and of music, and he would play. He'd play all the time, and I would get a kick out of sitting in his room and pretty much playing with all of the stuff that I wasn't supposed to. Although I never touched the actual trumpets, but he had a music stand set up and he would play just for fun, like almost every night. So I would sit and listen, have my own concerts. And he had a stereo that he had bought, which at the time in 1978 was creme de la creme of techniques from that audio deck and Sam Goody, which is now also still standing and behind me, plays well in the basement. Um, he had gotten techniques. Well, he also had a Bang& Olufsen later on. He did have an appreciation for aficionado sound, but Techniques turntable and the tuner still work. The tape deck has since gone to pasture, but it gave its life. I mean, I don't think that thing died maybe 10 years ago. And it's still in the original cabinets. And he had gotten Klipsch speakers, which were the best you could get at the time. And they were I set up in his room, and I just couldn't resist keeping my grubby little paws off of the stereo whenever I wanted to go listen to an album. But and he, he would complain, but he never stopped me either. So between that and card games and personal concerts and being taken everywhere, I can't say that I had any bad time or did anything. I'll say normal. I mean, elements are, but I think I got spoiled by extra special treats in different places that typical kids just didn't get to go or do and see. And that was very cool. And that's something that, I would not trade whatsoever. And whether it was some culinary fantastic combination or getting to go to an actual trade show for arcades. And I never forget the one day he walked in and they said, "Who's that?" He said, "That's my business partner." And I was very proud to be alongside him because I thought, that's right, I am the test subject. And we were a good team. So I was very sad to lose him. But, the best thing that I think that I can take away from a sad situation is that there's been so much influence that I have not only absorbed but been able to further. So, if nothing else in a negative thing, there's always that positive takeaway. And you'd be amazed how much a person influences you, and that you can therefore, in turn, use that influence to help other people or do a good thing. And to that end, I called this episode Pebble because although my brother was a very large man, and he really was Rocco, so of course we called him Rock. Try growing up in the late 70s with two guys named Rocco, okay, on the street. And there were other Roccos. So actually in less than 100-foot radius, there were 7 men named Rocco. I literally had 2 neighbors that were Rocco Jr. and Sr., and then one had a grandson, and my dad were Rocco Jr. and Sr. So that's odd, okay? But I always thought it was a cool name. So to be, Rocky Balboa, and my mom had a tendency to call my brother Rocky. But I like to call him Pebble because he was, in my head, little rock, because he wasn't my dad. He was my brother. So I like to call him Pebble. And he learned to love it. Didn't love it at first, but he learned to love it. So that's where the name came from. And to that end of turning a bad into a good and helping people, and hopefully you got some warm fuzzy out of this. I realized that he wasn't your brother, and you know what? You should be jealous because I would not have shared. But I'm happy to share the story. And if you're thinking about doing any kind of charitable work or giving to a charity this holiday season, and I'm just saying this completely off the cuff, maybe consider, if you really don't have one that's a special charity that you have, or you're thinking about doing something different, maybe give a gift and consider your local fire department, because first responders are always great, but fire fighters are extremely in harm's way for lots of stuff, and they do things you wouldn't even know. I mean, we joke about the cat in the tree from Pleasantville, but obviously they're fighting fires, but they are also usually the first on the scene, the first to know it, have a ton of volunteers, probably more so than any of the other first responders, and they're based on volunteers. And they also do things like, check your chimneys. They do fire prevention, and they'll go in and talk to schools, and they give little hats out and explain to kids like why it's important to, make sure you have all of your trier training, stop, drop, and roll, all that kind of fun stuff. And they can uh, safety proof your outlets and things like that. So there's a lot, that firefighters do, and will do, if you incorporate them into your community. So definitely don't forget your local firemen. I know for us, Station 51 has always been great, and certainly we owe them a lot. And not only that, but of course my brother was a part of it for a very long time. But there's a lot of really good people, and they're giving freely of their time. And I can't tell you how many days and late nights, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, that siren would go, and he'd jump up out of bed and grab his keys and throw on his outfit and run right out. He might get back 5, 6 hours later, disgusting and soaked, to take a shower and turn around and go to work. So nobody asks them to do that. They do it of their own volition. And a lot of good people out there doing that. So it's an option if you're thinking about giving to a charity this holiday season. Maybe think about your local fire department. I really appreciate the opportunity to give you a keyhole peek into an awesome man's life, and hopefully it will serve as an inspiration to you in some way. I would encourage you all to have a great holiday season, and definitely put out any campfires that you leave. Make sure any thing burning is extinguished properly. And don't forget to clean out the ashes in your chimney. Make sure your Christmas tree is properly watered. And watch those lights, because some of the old ones can get hot. So take care of that. And if you see a Pac-Man machine anywhere, definitely go play it. And if you are into possibly buying a new vehicle, well, go for it. And if you are a musician, enjoy that Trumpeter's Lullaby and Chuckman Jones Feels So Good, because that's the way to go, and practice your trumpet tune. And if you're going to play cards, maybe give Rummy or Knock Rummy or Rummy 500 a try. And I would say if you're thinking about being a pilot, go study and get that license. And don't worry about being colorblind, because I don't know that that's still a thing. But the one big takeaway would be, if somebody asks you to get them a Dunkin' Donuts coffee, find the time to do it, because I'm not big on regrets. But if there's one thing that I would go back and fix, it would have been picking up that coffee that night. Because it turns out I didn't have until Saturday to do it. So maybe make sure you take the time to take care of people that take care of you. So don't forget that. I'm Terry Tenaglia. Thanks for listening.